right. Cameron, thank you for returning. Do you know that it's almost a year to the day, and I literally mean to the day, since we met on stage in New York City talking about preparedness for an AI world that we weren't quite living in yet at the time. It is wild how much has changed in the last year, and also for you personally, and you've been delivering such incredible content on Substack over the last 6 months that we've all been really benefiting from, and I want to talk to you about. But ahead of launching into that, I want to recognize that a lot of people listening in today know you for the impact that you've had as your role of Chief Learning Officer at Citi. And as is often the case with incredibly successful people, we see you at the peak of your career, but we don't know you at the beginning of your journey. And as I've gotten to know you over the last number of years, something that really stands out to me every single time I meet you and speak to you is just how much of a deep thinker you are, an incredible leader. So my question is, Cameron, were you born with these skills, or was there some early influence or context that really set you up for being able to demonstrate so wonderfully these skills that you do today?
Well, first of all, let me say it's nice to be with you too, Sarah. And I would say the same thing back to you. That's very generous, right? To the extent any of that is true, I would say to you, if we met each other when I was 25, you would not be saying these things. Uh, we're going to have a conversation, today, and it's going to go into this space about wisdom. But you're setting this up nicely because any success that I've had, it probably comes from two things, right? The first is just being fortunate enough to have been brought up as a musician and understanding what discipline means and receiving critique and just getting used to for the 1% of the time you spend on stage, 99% of the time is spent alone and just suffering through the process. That's in my bones. And the second thing I'll say, I've just been so lucky to work with, for, and to lead extraordinary people. And I just steal all the things I like about other people. And so the combination of those two things, I think, and just making a ton of mistakes and learning from mistakes has shaped me to who I am.
Well, knowing a lot of the team that surrounded you in your role, I can say that you choose very wisely and well in the people that you surround yourself with, and that they have always spoken so highly of you. So I think there's a completely mutual sentiment there. When we spoke a year ago, it's astonishing to me. At the time, we were talking about AI in terms of tools and platforms. And we were grappling with, I was partnering with clients in terms of helping to define strategy to build, buy, borrow. You were doing the same at Citi. And largely speaking, the majority of companies that we're working with today, or that we're seeing, they've really transitioned into that element of things, and they have tools available, and there's a lot of encouragement and adoption of those tools. But in 2026, the conversation, certainly for me, and I'd love to understand from you, has shifted from talking about tools and AI as tools and platforms to AI as systems that do the work, and in some cases replace the work. So I'd love to get your vantage point in terms of how AI as systems is now mimicking some of the work that we do in terms of decision making and ownership and judgment.
Hmm. Well, let's start back to your original statement that I cannot believe what has happened in a year. The statement of, I think it goes, people grossly underestimate what can happen in a month, but overestimate what could happen in a month and underestimate what can happen in a year. And isn't that the truth right now? We were talking about this. It was mainly conceptual back then. It was mainly prompt-based tools only, right? Which sat there idle until you prompted it to do something. It was a exchange that went this way, and then that was that. So the things that are changing, to your point, is that the machines are smarter, they're faster. Agentic AI is coming online, which we should talk about, because now you're starting to get semi-autonomous or moving into fully autonomous little e-helpers that can help. That's going to fundamentally change the dynamic. And with all of that comes a change in one's self-conception and leadership style, and the way we train, and the way we do culture, and all the rest of it. So that's a broad base for the rest of this discussion that we're having right now.
So as we're moving from AI into something that's closer to agents, even sometimes taking on roles that feel peer-like, What do you think leaders today are least prepared for in that transition? And I know you do a lot of work that is self-reflective, team reflective, culture reflective.
Well, let's start by saying that everything you're saying I agree with 100%. It's not quite here yet, but we can see what you're talking about now in labs and in some companies. However, this sets up my first of the many dislocations I think current leaders have. I think people grossly underestimate, once we hit this knee of the curve, how fast it's going to happen. Right now, most people's experience still prompt-based tools, a little bit of agents, but it's still kind of linear and predictive. But man, once this thing takes off with agents and proxies, it's going to be something. Another thing I think people are unprepared for is their own insecurity, because particularly if you've built your career on knowing something, right, being a technical master of something, and a machine is just clearly faster and better. We'll talk about better later at it. At least the knowledge part, that you have to deal with your own insecurity. And the final thing, I think, not the final, but another thing that people aren't really ready for is that the creation of an environment where you create psychological safety for humans and machines to work together, and where now your value is shifting into discernment and wisdom versus technical knowledge. All these things are happening, and they're going to all happen really quickly at once. That's what I'm hoping leaders will start to prepare for now, because we can get after a lot of this right now.
I 100% agree. And it's interesting. This is where I find myself questioning some of our default responses to preparedness. So, we're a year later and a lot has been done and a lot has been implemented, but we're still in that mindset of we need to prepare for the future because it's going to become more intense in terms of the technology that's going to be available. And what I've experienced, when change hits an organization, we tend to add more training, more content, more models to try and understand and help support our workforce in those transitions. But a lot of the qualities that you're describing around discernment and presence and ethical clarity, they don't really seem to develop in the traditional way of delivering support to a workforce. So what's your take on how we actually help prepare our leaders first and workforce with what we know is inevitably coming downstream?
This is a big question. We may can just spend the rest of our time talking about this. Let me set up the premise. So this is my thesis, I suppose. We should go back and forth on this. Maybe we can debate each other. It'd be fun. But up to this point, the world has kind of rewarded the accumulation of information, the knowledge that you have, and your intellect, which is your speed to be able to process that. But wisdom is something different. And that's the premium on wisdom and discernment and some other attributes that we should talk about is going up, because that's something that machines do not do well, that humans are particularly great at, but that together lots of magic can happen. So if you buy that and you understand even just a little bit about how wisdom is acquired as a CHRO or a CEO, a board member, a CLO, you should be terrified. All right. I'm using a little hyperbole to get the point across, but you should be terrified because wisdom is not something that you throw an e-learning at and just cross your fingers. Because wisdom is this accumulated thing that happens over years and years and years. I say this a lot. It's like you can't microwave it. It's a crock pot or a slow cooker. That probably, it's got to be there for a long time. You gotta. And so the big question, we can talk about this, is, well, how in the world do you train that? Like, what can we do now to equip the humans to do the things the humans are particularly good at?
Mm-hmm. And I
I've
think,
said a lot. I mean, does that logic stream make sense? Or
I mean, we talk about this kind of stuff all the time. We're both deep thinkers, and I think both agree that the opportunity with tech and the more tech enabled the workforce becomes, the greater the opportunity to come back to ourselves. And that sounds abstract and conceptual, but what does it actually mean? It means that we have to learn the skills around being human, which largely we've forgotten because of the skills that we've learned in the workforce and school and parenting to produce. And if technology's promise is to produce and to automate a lot of what otherwise would have been considered work and productive aspects of living, then what are we going to do with our time? And I think that there's an imbalance in terms of how we value our time as people. And I am completely programmed this way to produce, to spend time doing something that is going to lead to an outcome. And AI and tech's promise is you don't have to do the same heavy lift and the same manual labor in the same sense in a technology framework as you would have done. And I think the insecurity that breeds in all of us, and some are more predisposed to feeling that insecurity than others, is that, well, what am I going to do? What is my value? Like what is my worth in the workplace if my work and the hard effort of doing the thing isn't seen? What am I bringing to the table? And I don't have an answer for that for everybody, yet I certainly do from my own perspective.
You said that beautifully. I'm going to later, after this is produced, I'm going to just clip that and show it in my own seminars and things that I do. You said that really beautifully. I'm going to pick up on a word you use so we can spin on it for a little bit. You said produce, and I think that's right. But we have to reframe what production means, like how to produce. What is the value that we, the human, imbue in the production? These are seem like very slight questions, but the answers to these, at least what I think the answers are profound. So, for example, this has been well documented. You can read about this in other places, but the premium that's going to be put on discernment, ethical judgment, the creation of psychological safety, systems thinking, context, politics. These are things that the humans, not all of us, but we do have a natural capacity to understand these things in a way that a machine just cannot, or at least today's version of the machine cannot. So if you're not leaning into those skills and leading into that part of you in your work, you're going to find yourself falling behind. So the obvious answer is begin to employ those now and start to figure out how to develop those, because as time goes on, that's going to be more and more important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've found it useful to think about a role that embodies that type of activity or thinking, just for clarity's sake, because I do feel like in the workplace now, we're trying to understand, okay, well, at a conceptual level, this tech is coming. I'm going to have an opportunity to really find myself and my voice in the mix of more automated workforce and understand my value. But it doesn't help me understand, like, what does that look like? Where do I start? And I've started thinking about this in the context of the mindset that we're really trying to nurture in people. And my default to in this type of transformation where we just don't know the potential outcome of where the workforce will be in the next 12 months. And we don't understand at an individual contributor level exactly how our role might be influenced and changed. But if we have a mindset where we think like an entrepreneur, we all of a sudden feel more in control of that outcome, or certainly I do. I think I naturally default to an entrepreneurial mindset, and I can, in assessing just my responses to some of the excitement and insecurity that the tech breeds in me, I've thought, my default is actually working in my favor in this regard, because my goals have always been in this entrepreneurial sense of owning my path, to then immediately look at, well, what is around me that supports the direction that I may go in. And I think employees or anybody in any role, in any function, thinking about their journey in the sense of they're in the center of their journey, and now they get to explore technology as an asset to them and to their how they might express themselves and how they might take ownership over the direction that they're going in. I find useful, and I'm not sure if that resonates with you in terms of thinking about this entrepreneurial mindset. Is it a mindset fix?
So good. That is so good. Yes. I think I've been using a slightly different term, I listen to you talk. I see some correlations. So use the term entrepreneurial mindset. Easy for you to say. It's hard for me to say. I also think some of the attributes of being an entrepreneur are also part and parcel of being a very senior leader. So let's go underneath that for a second and then juxtapose it against what we're going to have to be doing better as humans. When you're an entrepreneur or a very senior person at a company, first of all, you're thinking about systems, like how everything works together, how this plus this plus this plus this equals this other thing. So it's a different kind of thinking. It's not linear and deep. It's a little bit more broad. Second, you're thinking over a longer time horizon. Like, how might this play out in 1 month, 3 months, 7 months, 12 months, 30 years? That's a different way of thinking. And so I do think, just generically speaking, thinking like an entrepreneur an entrepreneur or a senior leader does start to get us in the zip code of the uniquely human attributes that we'll have to employ. Another thing an entrepreneur has, I'm droning on here, but it's just all coming to me. You're accountable.
Mm-hmm.
This is another thing. You're the big boss for sure. You're the CEO and all the big words, but you're also accountable for the outcome. And that's a different way of thinking. And here again, that's very much aligned with where we're all going to move in this wisdom economy.
Yeah, and I do think that accountability plays an important role here because a lot of what we are talking about in terms of the real skills that need to be developed, if we were to take a corporation, say you're responsible for the development of your workforce's skill, it's, that sort of transformation of oneself and mindset and really taking ownership for the direction that you go in your career and in life can't come from a corporation alone. Like, that's supported by social structures and community and parenting and peer groups and friends and extracurricular activity. And so, given that, we're talking about learning and development and environment or industry today, how much, when you think about some of this context in which we can really thrive, and it's not just in the workplace, how much responsibility do you think chief learning officers or HR leads should take on in terms of really trying to nurture what we know are going to be the skills that will really help people be resilient in the workforce today and in the next number of years? Or should they try and take that on? Should it just be,
Yeah.
it's
So is the core question is the extent to which L&D can influence or help this passageway that we must
well, I
go
think
through?
before we say can, I'd like to understand should.
Oh, it's a good.
Because they're two, like, I'd love to talk about, let's say we agree as should, but
Yeah,
why would we think should applies?
I do think we should
Okay.
start there. And the reason I think we should is that learning as a function, and I mean that both as a function and a capital F function, is not going away. We will continue to learn as humans. I think the traditional L&D function will also be training agents
Mm-hmm.
and humans. And my primary thesis, though, and I've written about this and it's out there if you want to look at it, is that the learning L&D department that we know today will need to work much more closely with recruiting, who's going to be recruiting all forms of intelligence, and the culture group, which is more about the conditions in which that intelligence is deployed. So together, they'll create a different kind of learning. But I do think they'll be around. I do think they'll be accountable for things, but the whole job's going to change, and the types of things and how we train things are going to be very different.
I love where you're going in the expansion of L&D because I was going to ask your thoughts on with AI generating content, skill mapping assessment, integration into the workflow of the systems that you're already using. And let's just assume that that becomes pretty sophisticated in the next few years. So it's largely automated. I was going to ask you, where do you see L&D in the future? Because needless to say, the individuals that I'm partnering with and working with, they're also asking questions around their role, as am I in my role in a corporate education provider company, and just thinking about, well, if not this, then what do we turn into? And I love that you're expanding the reach of L&D to be, in some respects, tech influencers. You're like you're hiring for the people and the tech. And I also have always thought that when it comes to culture and people and technology, like, that is a very integrated ecosystem that really needs to thrive together. and it can't be separate. And I think what you're describing is this opportunity to actually realize a full vision of an integrated workforce using culture as a way to influence and select tech. Am I getting that right?
Yes, for sure. Sarah, yeah, exactly. The L&D person, but some of this is true today. The more you talk, the more I'm just realizing uh, a very old school L&D function, even in this current moment, is probably throwing a piece of content into an environment that they know that content will evaporate from the human minds by this afternoon. And it's like just throwing away money. So even today, we need to be way more conscious of like, well, what are the conditions in which this learning is supposed to be deployed? How can we make sure those conditions like help the learner actually apply? These are all current questions as well. They're just going to become even more important in the future because one, you're going to have a lot more just intelligence in the place, whether that's human or synthetic, doesn't matter. It's going to be a lot more of it. So, you need to look at the conditions in which it resides. You said something very important though. And if you're an L&D senior person or aspiring to be one, you need to get this now. You are a software architect as well. You have to be very conscious of the sensing systems, sensing like the inference systems that help you understand what skills are in your company and where are they and how good are they. You need to be very aware of to your point, Sarah, the content creation systems. How good are they? What do they sense? What are their assets, the data sets that they can build on? How do they get back to the learner at the moment of need? So if you're not a very tech savvy, not tech savvy like programmer, that's becoming less important, but understanding systems and architecture, you're not going to be very effective in the coming uh, years as learning changes.
If I was to take anything away from thinking about what we're saying to people, start getting familiar and comfortable with systems, with tech, with infrastructure, that I would say to somebody, if that seems terrifying and like you're already behind, which we're really not, because we again are the most sophisticated designed system that exists in the world today. But if you're terrified about that, just think about the tasks that you do in life today that could be automated. I think the reason I benefit from the automation aspect of AI and generative AI is because very early on, when I was developing skills and career around UX, the whole goal was to try and automate what you just did. So, for example, I don't know if you've ever used Photoshop or any of the design, back in the day when like everyone's a designer now, and I'm glad I diversified my skill set because I genuinely would be very worried if I was still just working in Photoshop today. But back when it was a very niche skill set, you really had to understand all the Adobe Suite capability. And if you were doing something, you were manually doing it multiple times over. So if you wanted like a saturation of a particular layer in a file, and let's say you have 1,000 layers in that one file, and you wanted to apply it on more than one layer because it looked cool, you to manually do it. And then it evolved into you could just copy it one time and apply it to everything in the file. And so that's the holy grail that I think I've always been looking for is when I know something is repetitive, I'm sort of almost programmed to look for a way to automate it, which has really helped me understand opportunities in how I can then go on to do other things in my career and in my role today. But I think, again, coming back to and grounding us back to the conversation of in the workplace. So if I'm a leader and I'm saying, well, you need to get comfortable with systems. And I think this entrepreneurial mindset for me, or a way of explaining it is I think entrepreneurs by definition and by survival strategy have to be so scrappy. And so there is this sense of like, oh, what can help? How can I automate? How can I move faster? How can I get to the next step? And there's no complacency there. And I think, rightly or wrongly, some of the systems that exist in the workplace can foster this sort of switch off and manually do a thing that could be automated that doesn't really serve us very well. And then when you're switched to another mode of like, no, that's going to be done for you now. What are you going to bring? It's scary. And it brings us back to that point of demonstrating value and what is it that you're producing. So to wrap it all up into a thought or question, What do you think leaders today, when they're thinking about their teams and how to give them something actionable on the back of, you need to be think this way, have this type of mindset, and consider this type of tech? What are the few skills or the actionable ways that you think they could engage their teams to actually deliver on that? And do you think, because I do think, I do agree, I think corporates and leaders are responsible um, for being able to guide their teams and their corporation through the ambiguity and
Yeah.
even going to become more ambiguous with tech. But what are the couple of things that you think could be really
Mm.
actionable and serve somebody to set them up for success
Yeah.
just in the next 6 months alone?
Yeah, let's give this a go. I'm gonna actually build off your Photoshop example because I think it's telling. Photoshop has two elements in it. There's the technical element, like knowing how to do the color grading or whatever the thing is, and then deciding if you should. There's two different things. You can train. One is technical and one is art. They both work together in that. That's why, but it's a wonderful thing to think about. And I'm going to move this over to AI in a second because just because you can do the layers and the color this and the this and that and make it high def and all the other things you could do there, should you? And what is the artistic thing you're saying through that choice? Critical to think about that because AI is the same thing. AI just explodes the amount of things you can do. It doesn't mean you should, right? Because the human has to put his or her hand on it to mold it and shape it and make it something of value. Um, wisdom is really just knowing what matters. Wisdom is knowing what matters. But this gets at it because your ego's involved. A lot of us think in a very binary way. If I do this, it's a black or white, the gray area and paradox. We're going to have to get much more comfortable with non-dual thinking and paradox and all the things because that's what will be demanded of us in this machine era. Now, you asked a very practical question about what managers can do today. If I had to choose one thing, no, shoot, I can't just choose one. I have to choose two. Number one is you have to create a culture of experimentation and use of AI. You have to let everyone use it and let them make mistakes and fail. I use these terms carefully, but if you don't, you're dead before you start. But the other thing, if I were still managing people day to day, I would start to do structured reflections where with AI, I would ask the questions like, why did you choose that? Tell me why. What are the implications of your choice? Like, help them start to think about connections between the choice they made and the environment it's in, and what are the outcomes that might happen, just to groove those wires and start to join them together. That is the undergirding of wisdom. That's grossly oversimplified, but really understanding implications over a longer time horizon with multiple inputs. You've got to start coaching and training that way now.
Mm, I love that. And the coaching aspect, I think, is so important. And, coaching net today, I think, means creating space to experiment. And you put it perfectly in what you said. And, I'm thinking a lot about the last year. It went so fast. And when we spoke, and from when we last spoke to today, my own personal journey and trying to understand all of the available AI tools, platforms, and now systems at every point in time. Like it's like we are it's like the ground beneath us is constantly moving. And so it can be challenging to feel grounded, but I found my grounding in that exact point that you're making around experimentation. So at the start of last year, I was just like, let's just start experimenting with, right, if we were to use AI to replace a way in which, let's say, for example, we develop a training program versus if we were to use AI as a way to enhance the program that already exists. And certainly the work that I do, even though arguably we could be considered a tech company because we're using a lot of digital tools to create experiences, at our core, we're a people based company and we've always had people at the center of what we do, meaning coaches and leaders. And so I think some of these programs that we're designing and that I'm seeing like in the industry that are particularly effective are ones that extend that period of time beyond just a let's have a roundtable discussion around, how we should experiment with AI, to take this AI, log into your AI Academy, take this content and then apply this and you should be good and come back as we update things, into programs that invite conversation together and experimentation together. And I think those programs, from what I've seen, have proven to be the most practical application of some of what we're talking about, which is kind of some of it of which is hard to get your hands around and to formalize. And we shouldn't try. Like, a lot of the learnings and the coachings experimentation comes up in collaboration when we're given the space to do so. Um, so you're nodding, so I'm assuming you're in agreement.
Well, it's a question I was going to ask you because I was interested in your perspective on the well, you're answering it, which is lovely. First of all, I love the name intuition because that's like Kahneman's level one thinking. It's all about what we're going to need to be doing. We can get underneath that. So you've got a great brand to start with, and people trust you. But I wanted to know, like, just from a tactical standpoint, what are the types of interventions or programs, whatever you want to call them, that you would do? And I agree with you. I think we're already doing this today, but the importance of simulations, of putting people face to face with ambiguity or ethical situations that do not have a clear answer. I think that's the future of, if I'm running a successful learning company, I would bias my program set more towards that than just black and white binary technical training. Particularly if you're in the space of doing any kind of leadership training, because that's, again, we've beaten this to death, but that's where the world's that's where the unique human advantage will come for at least the foreseeable future, until machines become sentient and conscious and have emotions, which they just do not have today. And that's a much longer conversation as to whether they ever will.
I foresee another one of these in the not too distant future, where we've progressed on to that level of thinking. And thank you for the acknowledgement of her name. It was a stroke of brilliance. Our founder, so Intuition has been in business for 40 years. And imagine, picking the name Intuition, not knowing the way that the world was going to go in terms of the workforce. So at the time, our whole business was founded on needing to get content, information, training to somebody while they were doing their job at their desk, and not having to suffer the consequence of downtime to send that person somewhere to get that information. And it's certainly at a time where there was nobody to ask. Everything was very new and emerging in financial services. So this product was created for this team that needed access to information, and then realized, well, there's other companies, and that's where the business of Intuition came about. But the thing that I'm particularly enjoying over the last number of years is just knowing with certainty that our namesake is going to be so profoundly meaningful in the future of our business. And you're right in terms of, as leading the Americas, and the vision for the company globally is that we're a very integrated company, in that, yes, technical skills is something that is our thoroughbred. It's the framework on which we built the business and designed. But the future, in terms of how we influence, because to that point, like, if we can replace what can be automated, and if we can integrate into systems of work, where do I fit in? What am I doing in the mix of all of this? And what I'm doing is, I'm that coach, sounding board person, human contact that you can't replace currently with AI and with technology. And that is the essence of the programs that we build. And, I think some of the topics that we're talking about, which really fundamentally speak about how do we develop our innate human ability, the first thing is, and that we try and bring attention to, is just to be conscious of its place in the workplace. Of all of the things with COVID, the one gift that it gave us was that we, from that point on, recognized each other as emotional beings, because we were all going through something together globally. And it's the first time in my career history that I've ever noticed and felt comfortable myself talking about emotions and feelings in the way that we did then, which was just a real check-in from an emotional, mental level, in terms of how you were doing. And I think that opened Pandora's box. So, right, we're allowed to be ourselves. We're allowed to recognize that we're vulnerable, that we're imperfect, and that in the future, I think, as AI and tech learns to become more sentient and human like, our imperfections will actually be the thing that make us so powerful. And I'm sort of joyous about that, but also I think that there does put a lot of emphasis on us as individuals knowing ourselves and, understanding ourselves in that capacity.
You've distilled it down. A very important point. This self-knowing, self-mastery is the golden key. It's the silver bullet, or whatever metaphor you want to use in this era. Because if you do buy this wisdom economy thesis where, you have to orchestrate and understand the ethical trade-offs and the context and the time horizons and the systems and all the rest of it, being comfortable with yourself, really being self-reflective about why do I think this is the right way to go? Where's my ego coming in? Where's the intuition versus analysis? Like, these are different questions. Now, some of us just do this naturally, but more of us are going to have to do it. It can be developed. It just takes a lot more doing. But really being introspective, to your point, and saying, yeah, I can't trust myself on this one because myself was informed this way, and that way doesn't match the situation that we're analyzing here. But that takes a lot of self, what's the word? Not confidence, but grounding. You just have to really be grounded.
Yeah, and it's the reality is how we move through the workplace today isn't any different to years ago in terms of it's very much tied to where you are in your career. I can have this perspective now and over the last 10, 15, let's say 13 years, where my goal was to continuously replace myself. And that was somewhat influenced and informed by just my own personality of not wanting to be doing the same thing year on year and in necessarily feeling like I'm in the same place year on year, but building and going on to adding to skill set and getting more exposure. But what I found through the years where I was forced to do that because of growth within business or opportunities, and I wasn't quite sure what the next stage looked like. I've often found myself, I would set myself up for success in terms of, all right, I'm removing myself as being the kind of the crux that holds this particular project or team or operation together. I'm in elevating others to step into that role, and I'm going to go somewhere that hasn't been defined. And I do thrive in that environment, but I also know what it feels like to it's a lonely journey when you're like, okay, I'm going to automate, replace, scale, go somewhere else with a view to getting somewhere else that can't be seen straight away. There's a lot of self trust, company and team trust. So that's why I'm saying that I wouldn't have made such quick moves to switch roles or move up in roles earlier on in my career. But you get to a point where you're recognized for certain things and there's a trust there to be able to do it if you've got the appetite for it. But what I noticed certainly in the last few years is that when it's so ambiguous where we're going in workforce and with tech, that there were often times that I doubted even the space that I'd given myself to step into. And I would just find myself, I actually just want to go back to or default into the weeds of things again because it's so much more comfortable. And I, I think about that a lot when I think about what we're asking employees to do in terms of like, get out of the weeds, stop doing so many manual things and try and think about the automation and get on to the next thing. It is so uncomfortable. It's so vulnerable. You feel so exposed when you're in a space that hasn't been clearly defined. So I just want to share that my own personal journey.
No, that's spot on. What we're talking about here is disruption. And there are two ways you'll be disrupted. Either you'll disrupt yourself proactively, which you've done, and I know people that do this very well, or something else will come and disrupt it for you. And I'm worried about the second group of people who wait. Now, we're all already, if you don't know it yet, we're in an event right now where we're all being disrupted without our permission through AI and other things that are happening geopolitically, but that's a different podcast. So you better start thinking now about how you're going to navigate that. My advice to everybody is be the one that disrupts yourself. You re-architect your job. Use AI to do it. You create conditions where you have to come face to face with ambiguity and learn. Stop waiting. Because normally, not all the time, but if you're the one who waits for somebody else to do it to you, you're normally going to be on the losing end of that transaction. So better to be a first mover and deal with all the things you said, which is absolutely true. Loneliness, fear, self-doubt. At least these are the things I experience. But I would choose that over loss of agency. The ambiguity is already there, so that's not new. That's a different mindset, though. You just said it perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, I do keep coming back to this. Like, if we're going to teach people one thing, it's this mindset shift of you are not a victim of the changes as a result of technology, necessarily. Some industries, yes, and I'm looking right now. It just caught my attention on the wall. This beautiful company, and called Rathborn candles. So they're the longest candle making company in the world, and they happen to be Irish. I swear I'm not obsessed with all things Irish, but whatever. They just happen to be Irish.
But we're okay if you are, obviously.
Okay, I am just a tad. Also, American, so of course. Um, what I think about this company a lot, because they're the oldest candle making company in the world, Rathborns, and they're the oldest company in Ireland, and they used to light the streets of Ireland with their candles. Thriving business that have somehow survived generations of business and today sell more candles and are a big enterprise in the candle making business. And what that demonstrates is that technology doesn't necessarily replace something, but that thing can often change meaning. So now candles are a luxury, before they were a necessity. So I think that, that to me is inspiring, in that not all things will completely get replaced by technology. A lot of things will just change meaning, and that will evolve to create other service or need for other services that we will, we'll be a workforce that will deliver on that also. So Cameron, just to wrap this, I mean, we could do a lot more talking and deep diving in this.
We can do a phase 2 some other time.
We should do a phase 2. And I think, full disclaimer for everybody listening, everything's changing all the time. All the things changing all the time. So you know what? This is going to be dated in 6 months anyway. So we'll have to, that's my hook to get you to come back and talk to me in the future.
I agree with you. Oh, and I'll come back and talk anytime. I love this. But these things, there are some, we're rightly talking about a lot of things that'll change, but sometimes it's fun to just talk about what won't change. And this is my theory. I can't prove it, but as long as humans exist, there's a specialness to us. We feel pain. We can love or not love someone back. We have this perspective that can be expansive across multiple disciplines and across time. And these are things that, again, machines are not great at. I don't think they'll be great at it for a while. So there are some enduring things about being humans that we can bet on, and that we can develop, and that we can double down on, that will make us more useful, for lack of a better term, over the course of time. So let's all kind of work on those core elements and self-knowing, because I do think that's durable.
Absolutely. There are things about us as humans that are uniquely scarce, and things like love and connection, uniquely scarce, and we have it in abundance, and we just need to learn how to unlock some of those qualities. On that note, Cameron, thank you so much. I love our conversations, the thinking behind a lot of the advice and guidance that you've provided, not only today, but constantly, and through your Substack, and I'll drop the link to that as well. And we'll definitely continue the conversation. I thank everybody for tuning in, and encourage those of you who are interested in talking and discussing further some of the topics that we've outlined but not exactly figured out. Please do reach out to us. We're working in partnership and figuring some of this stuff out, and we're very available to have broader conversations around in different contexts. So thank you for joining us. Thank you again, Cameron. Take care.
Thank you, Sarah. Pleasure.